So then the question is, if you're going to go to mediation, do you want to go just the two of you, or do you want to bring lawyers? And there's pros and cons to whether you want to have your lawyers come to mediation with you, or if you want to go by yourselves. Some people just decide that they think they can work through the issues themselves. They don't have very complicated assets. They basically have mutually decided to divorce. They feel very comfortable coming up with a custody plan for their children. Now, that said, if you go to a mediator, and especially some people think if you go to a lawyer mediator, that they're going to give you legal advice, like tell you what might be your separate property, or questions about alimony or maintenance, like maybe you go in and you don't realize that you could qualify for alimony or spousal maintenance. It's not really the job of that lawyer mediator to tell you that for mediation in the pure sense of the word. So don't go to a lawyer mediator looking for legal advice if you're just going to go without lawyers. So that's if you're going to go by yourselves without lawyers. Lawyers rarely go to mediations with mental health workers for parenting plans. Those are usually more sort of a collaborative process between the mental health professional and the parties. And that's why the mental health mediators can be really helpful at that, because they're very patient about going through what's best for your kids. So sometimes you need to have a lawyer to either coach you before you go to mediation, or most people, or a lot of people, actually bring their lawyers to mediation, and there's a certain mediation style for that. And it's always a good idea to consult with a lawyer before you do anything, even if you just go by an hour or two of a lawyer's time, because there's issues that you might not see that you should really address. And if you see there's an issue that you can make a separate property claim about your house, but you just choose not to, at least you knew going into the mediation that you had that option. I have people come to me pretty frequently who say, my husband and I are going to go to mediation. I need to know what my rights are. I want to know what my divorce rights are. I want to know about the divorce process. Or maybe they come in and they just say, I actually had a woman come in the other day who didn't realize that since she had owned a house in Europe, and she sold that house and bought a house here, and she and her husband have been living in that house for a few years, it didn't even occur to her that the equity in their house, which was a lot, was open to a separate property claim on her part. So she was getting ready to go to one of those mediators who didn't have any training in the legal perspective, and we were able to work through how she could make her separate property claim. So we went through that whole situation so that when she got to the mediator, she had an understanding of the laws in our state as they pertain to her situation. So that's the mediation process if you have a lawyer as a coach outside of the process. Then there's mediation where you bring your lawyers, and in those mediations, it's typically a situation where you don't sit all together in the same room. You are and this kind of a mediation is called technically more of a settlement conference. So you and your lawyer would be in one room, and your husband and his lawyer would be in another room, and then the mediator, who's typically in this case either a retired judge or a lawyer, goes back and forth between the rooms and tries to work with the parties sort of independently and separately to compromise. And so there's a little bit of compromise here, and then bring an offer over to this room, and there's a little bit of compromise here, bring an offer back over to this room. And then the lawyer mediator will come up with some ideas. Well, how about if we do this? Sometimes when you're in a mediation, you might want to bring with you like a CPA who can help you figure out the tax consequences of any decisions that you might be making. There's other kinds of experts that you might want to either consult before you go and have them available to you by phone. But for now, what I want you to remember is that when you get to mediation, you should be very prepared. You should know exactly what your assets are. You should know kind of what you think is appropriate in terms of a parenting plan. And even if you're in a mediation where you have your lawyer and their lawyer and you're all in separate rooms, you know, sometimes these rooms look like, you know, these huge conference rooms with, you know, laptops and spreadsheets, and the CPA is in there, and maybe a parenting evaluator might be available by phone, or there might be a vocational person. So it turns into a very collaborative process for you and your team, and then your husband and his team is over in another room, and there's a lot of back and forth. So that's when you go to mediation with lawyers. So when you are trying to decide, and one thing that kind of drives what kind of mediation you might want to go to has a lot to do with the complexity of your situation. And situations can be complex because of the finances, or they can be complex because of challenges with your parenting plan. So if you have financial complexities, that's usually regarding maybe you own a business, maybe you need retirement planning, spousal maintenance and alimony is always a big deal, and you have to do a lot of negotiating to come to a place where you make a decision about alimony or spousal support. So one last thing I want to say about mediation is that in most states, at the end of a mediation or a settlement conference, there's an opportunity to sign a binding contract. And in most states, that's a binding contract that you can't really go back on. So, and you've got to find out in your state if that's the case. But if you're going to go into mediation, and if you get tired and you let the other side pressure you into accepting a settlement that might not be in your best interest, sometimes it's almost impossible to unravel that settlement. And I don't know how it is in your state because I don't practice there, but I do know in many states or most states there are legally binding contracts that get signed in mediation that you're stuck with. And you should find that out before you go to mediation. Certainly find out if that's the case in your state, because you want to know exactly what you're going to be signing at the end of the process, which doesn't mean you have to sign it. It means a lot of people go to mediation and then they want to walk away and go back and talk to their lawyer, and that's perfectly okay. But a lot of people get a little bit pressured under the circumstances. So those are the types of mediation and alternative dispute resolution. Again, there's arbitration, which is where a professional makes a decision for you. There's mediation, where it's a facilitated process and the parties actually make their own decision, either by sitting in the same room with each other and working through their issues, or being in separate rooms and having the mediator going back and forth between rooms, helping to come to a settlement. And then there's the mediation arbitration, which people call med-arb, which is where you do the back and forth thing, either in the same room together with your mediator or in separate rooms with your mediator going back and forth. And at the end of a med-arb session, and it might take a couple of sessions and you might come back several times, but at the end of it all, if there's some things that you haven't been able to resolve, you turn that over to the arbitrator who makes a decision. And in most jurisdictions, those decisions you enter those in court and they become legally binding decisions. So as you can tell, there's a lot of homework that you have to do before you get to mediation. And one of the biggest cautions I can give you is some people come into the divorce process and they just really want to get done. They really don't want to go through anything really ugly. They don't want to have to be having a big fight. You don't have to have a big fight just to get a good result. What you have to do is you have to be educated and you have to empower yourself. And that's kind of the whole purpose of this Divorganized series that we're putting together, is to give you the resources and give you the ability to spot the issues that are important in your case, so that by the time you get to the mediation session, you should have a very good idea of exactly what you've got and exactly what the issues are and exactly how you think a fair resolution would be.